Story 1, The Frequency. The CB radio started speaking in my dead daughter's voice at 2:47 a.m., and I absolutely knew I should turn it off. But she was telling me things only she could know. Things from the morning she died. "Daddy, the pancakes burned," the voice crackled through the static. "You scraped the black parts off and told me they were just extra crispy. You cried in the garage after." My hands locked on the wheel, knuckles bone-white against the black leather. The Dalton Highway stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of asphalt carved through wilderness so absolute it felt like driving through the void itself. March 14th, 2023. 3 years to the day since Emma died, since the seizure took her while I was on a run to Prudhoe Bay while she was eating those goddamn pancakes. "Channel 19 shouldn't do this," I whispered to myself. Robert Hayes, 22 years hauling freight, and I was losing my mind at mile marker 203. The Aurora Borealis writhed overhead like something dying in slow motion, green and purple bleeding across the sky. I'd seen the northern lights 1,000 times. They'd never moved like this, never pulsed in rhythm with the voice on the radio. "Remember what you promised me, Daddy. You said you'd always come home." I grabbed the CB handset, my voice breaking. "Emma, baby, is that you?" The static intensified, forming patterns. Through the windshield, the Aurora began to spiral, creating a vortex directly above the highway. The temperature gauge in my Peterbilt dropped 15 degrees in 30 seconds. My breath came out in clouds. "But you weren't home," the voice continued, and now it had an edge, something underneath the sweetness. "You were here on this road. You're always on this road." "I'm sorry," I choked out. "Baby, I'm so sorry." "Pull over at mile marker 237, the voice commanded. Not Emma's inflection anymore, something wearing her voice like a stolen coat. "There's something you need to see." Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, to throw the CB out the window, to turn around. But what father could ignore his daughter's voice, even when his rational mind knew it couldn't be real? I'd been hauling drilling equipment north, 43,000 pounds of pipe joints and industrial machinery. The load pulled heavy behind me, and now it felt heavier, accusatory, like it knew I was about to do something stupid. Mile marker 210. The Aurora intensified, and I noticed something impossible. The lights were forming shapes, numbers, coordinates maybe, or equations. They burned themselves into my retinas, and when I blinked, I could still see them traced against my eyelids in phosphorescent afterimage. "You want to know what happened after I died, Daddy?" "Please," I begged. "Please stop." "I waited for you in the space between. I waited and waited. But you know what lives in that space, in the gaps between the world." The CB began cycling through channels on its own. Channel 1, 2, 3, all the way to 40, then back to 19. Each channel carried a different voice. Some were truckers I'd known. Some were drivers who disappeared on the Dalton. Some were voices in languages that had never existed in human mouths. Mile marker 220. My trailer began to sway, not from wind, but from something inside it. I could hear the cargo shifting, rearranging itself. The joints and pipes were moving independently, and through my side mirror, I saw the trailer rocking on its suspension like something was being born in there. The Aurora is a door, Daddy. Did you know that? The old Inuit peoples knew. That's why they feared it, why they told their children never to whistle at the lights. I hadn't whistled, but I'd called out to them. Last year, drunk and grieving on this same highway, I'd stopped and screamed at the lights, demanding they bring her back, demanding they show me what happened after. demanding God or the universe or whatever the fuck was listening to explain why Emma was gone. Apparently, something had listened. Mile marker 230, 7 miles to go. The road was empty in both directions, not unusual for the Dalton at this hour, but now the emptiness felt intentional, arranged. I was being given privacy for something. The temperature gauge hit 0. Frost began spreading across the inside of my windshield in patterns that looked like circulatory systems, like someone was mapping out veins on the glass. "Pull over now," the voice said, Emma's voice, but also a chorus. How many things were speaking through her frequency? I pressed the brake. My rig began to slow, and as it did, the Aurora descended. It shouldn't have been possible. The lights were ionospheric phenomena 60 miles up, but they were coming down like curtains being lowered on a stage, and I was the only actor. Mile marker 237. I guided the Peterbilt onto the shoulder, my whole body shaking. The air brake hissed, a sound like the world exhaling. I showl. D, stay in the cab, lock the doors. Whatever was happening, the cab was safe. The cab was. My hand was already on the door handle. I stepped out into cold so profound it felt like being stabbed. Minus 37 degrees Fahrenheit according to the external thermometer, but it felt colder. The cold that came before the universe started. The cold of deep space. The aurora surrounded me, pillars of light forming a corridor. They moved with intelligence, herding me toward the trailer. I walked because I couldn't not walk, because somewhere in my broken heart I believed I might see Emma again. I opened the trailer doors. The pipes and joints had arranged themselves into a structure. A skeleton, 70 feet long, impossibly intricate. And it was breathing. The metal expanding and contracting, steam rising from the connections despite the cold. "We needed material," the chorus voice said, coming from everywhere now, "to build the bridge to show you." The skeleton began to glow with aurora light, and I saw through it, saw into it. Dimensions I didn't have names for unfolded before me and at the center. Emma, not my daughter, what wore her shape? What had been waiting in the between space, getting hungry, getting lonely, learning to mimic? "You called us, Daddy, through the frequency, through the lights." I understood then. The aurora wasn't just light, it was a signal, a carrier wave. And I'd tuned into it, opened a channel, invited something through by sheer force of grief. The metal skeleton pulled itself together tighter, forming a cage, or a cradle. "We can bring her back," the voices promised. "We can make you a family again. All we need is a host." The pipes began to move toward me. I ran. God help me. I ran like I should have run years ago from this job, from this highway, from the grief that had made me vulnerable. I threw myself into the cab, fired up the engine, and released the brake. The skeleton exploded outward, metal screaming as it tore itself apart trying to grab the trailer. I felt the impact as pipes smashed against the undercarriage, heard them bouncing and clanging behind me. In the mirror, the aurora was taking shape. Something massive. Something that had been waiting for someone stupid enough to answer when it called. I drove 90 miles per hour on a highway that barely allowed 50. The Peterbilt shuddered and groaned, but I didn't slow down. Couldn't slow down. Behind me, the lights pursued for 17 miles. Then, at mile marker 254, they stopped. Released me. But the CB radio kept hissing. I drove straight through to Fairbanks, abandoned the rig at the depot, and quit. Moved to Phoenix. Desert. No aurora, no northern lights, no frequencies that carried voices from the between spaces. But sometimes at 2:47 a.m. my phone crackles with static. and I hear Emma's voice asking me why I left her behind again, asking when I'm coming back to the highway. The Aurora is a door, and I knocked. Now something on the other side knows my name. I keep telling myself I'll never go back to Alaska, that I'll never drive that highway again. But grief is a strange thing. It makes you do stupid things. It makes you answer when things call to you in voices of the dead. And sometimes, late at night, I look up flight prices to Anchorage. Because maybe, if I'm fast enough, if I'm smart enough, if I love her enough, maybe I can pull Emma back from whatever answered when I screamed at those lights. Or maybe that's exactly what it wants me to think. The frequency is still open, and something is still listening. Story 2, The Mirror Route. Patricia Sullivan noticed the road was running backwards at precisely 11:34 p.m., and by then it was already too late to turn around. The mile markers were counting up when they should have been counting down. She'd passed marker 89 5 minutes ago heading south on the Richardson Highway, and now she was passing marker 92. Mathematics didn't work that way. Geography didn't work that way. But the Aurora Borealis overhead was folding in on itself like origami made of light, and Patricia was beginning to suspect normal rules had been suspended. "Dispatch, this is Rig 47, you copy?" She pressed the button on her Bluetooth headset 3 times. Static answered. The same static that had been answering for the past 20 minutes, ever since the Northern Lights started doing that folding thing. She'd been hauling refrigerated seafood from Valdez to Anchorage, 38,000 pounds of frozen king crab that represented 6 months of fishing for the boats that caught them. The reefer unit hummed behind her, keeping everything at -10 degrees. At least that was still working normally. Small mercies. Mile marker 95. Patricia had driven this route 417 times in her 8-year career. She knew every curve, every truck stop, every place where black ice formed first in winter. The Richardson Highway was her bread and butter. Her primary run, and it did not count backwards. The Aurora pressed closer to the ground, close enough that she could see individual streamers of light, each one moving independently. They reminded her of fingers, thousands of luminescent fingers reaching down from the sky, testing the surface of reality. Mile marker 98. Her GPS showed her heading in the right direction, the blue line tracking toward Anchorage, but the coordinates were wrong. Longitude was fine. Latitude was shifting into impossible numbers, decimal points that suggested she was somehow north of the North Pole. "Okay," she said aloud, her voice steady despite the ice forming in her stomach. "Okay, Patricia, you're hallucinating. Bad burrito at the truck stop. Exhaust leak in the cab, something rational." Mile marker 101. The road ahead began to shimmer, and Patricia saw something that made her slam on the brakes. Another truck was approaching from the south, same make and model as hers, same company logo, same refrigerated trailer. Same driver in the cab. Patricia stared at herself through the windshield of the approaching truck. The other Patricia stared back. Neither of them was wearing the expression of someone who thought this was a hallucination. They passed each other at mile marker 104, and Patricia craned her neck to watch the other truck disappear behind her. In her mirror, she saw the other Patricia doing the same thing. Both of them looking back at each other, both of them trying to understand. The CB radio crackled to life. "This is Rig 47, her own voice said. "Is anyone else experiencing anomalous conditions on the Richardson Highway?" Patricia grabbed her handset. This is Rig 47. I'm hearing myself. Oh God, the other Patricia said. Oh God, it's happening again. Again, Patricia demanded. What do you mean again? I've been driving this route for 3 days, the other voice said, and Patricia could hear the exhaustion in it, the terror. I keep passing myself. There are 17 of us now, 17 trucks, 17 Patricias. Each one entered the loop at a different time. The aurora intensified, and Patricia watched as the northern lights began to replicate themselves. One stream of light became two. Two became four, fractaling infinitely, creating copies of copies. Mile marker 107. How do I get out? Patricia asked, her voice cracking. You don't, the other Patricia said. The road keeps splitting. Every time you pass yourself, you create a new branch, a new you that has to drive it. We're all trying to reach Anchorage, but Anchorage keeps getting farther away. Patricia checked her odometer. She'd driven 43 miles since leaving Valdez. The GPS said she'd traveled 12 miles. The mile markers said she'd gone negative 15 miles. 3 different measurements, 3 different realities, all of them existing simultaneously on the same stretch of highway. Who's doing this? Patricia whispered. Look up, all the versions of her voice said in unison through the CB. Really look at the aurora. Patricia looked. The northern lights weren't random. They were structured, organized. They formed patterns that hurt to perceive, geometries that her brain tried to reject because they existed in more dimensions than she had the capacity to process. And in the patterns, she saw faces. Not human faces, impressions of consciousness. Things that lived in the spaces between light particles, that rode the solar wind down to Earth's magnetic field, that had been watching humanity for millennia and finding us fascinating in the way humans found insects fascinating. They were experimenting. Mile marker 110, and Patricia saw the next version of herself approaching. This one looked worse. Sunken eyes, hands gripping the wheel so hard they'd probably cramped into claws. I'm number 8, that Patricia said over the CB as they passed. You're making good time. I was on my 2nd day when I hit marker 110. How long can the reefer unit run? Patricia asked, a horrible thought occurring to her. Silence on the CB, long enough that Patricia knew the answer. Mine died 6 hours ago, said a voice. Number 12, the cargo thawed, the smell is, you'll find out. No, Patricia said. No, I'm getting out of this. There has to be a way. We all thought that, said another voice. Number 4, maybe, or 5. But the road keeps splitting, and we keep driving, and the aurora keeps watching. Mile marker 113. Patricia made a decision. She slowed the truck, pulled onto the shoulder. If you could call it that, the boundary between road and not road was getting fuzzy, and stopped. Put the transmission in neutral. Set the brake. What are you doing? Multiple voices asked. Don't stop driving. When you stop, you start thinking about how long you've been here, about how the sun never seems to rise, about how you can't remember what your life was like before the highway. I'm not playing. Gee, Patricia said. She turned off the engine. The aurora swarmed down like bees to honey. Light flooded the cab, and Patricia felt herself being observed at the quantum level. Every atom of her body examined, every thought catalogued. The things in the lights were curious about her choice, about her defiance. And then they showed her the truth. She saw the highway from above, from their perspective. It wasn't shaped like a road anymore. It had folded into a Möbius strip, a loop with only one surface, and on it hundreds of trucks drove endlessly. Thousands of them, not just Patricia. Other drivers who'd gotten caught in the loop over years, decades, maybe centuries. All of them trying to reach a destination that existed on a part of the strip that was simultaneously nowhere and everywhere. "Start the engine," the voices pleaded. "Please, when you stop, you start to phase, you start to become part of the road itself." Patricia looked down at her hands. They were translucent. She could see through them to the steering wheel underneath. Could see the light passing through her skin like she was made of frosted glass. "No," she said. "If I can't move forward, I'll move differently." She opened the driver's door and stepped out onto the highway. The asphalt felt solid, real, but when she looked closely, she could see it was made of compressed light, of Aurora material given the impression of substance. The entire road was a construct, a trap, a maze built by things that wanted to see how long humans would keep driving before they realized there was no destination. Patricia walked to the trailer, opened it, and stared at 38,000 pounds of frozen king crab. Except it wasn't crab anymore. It was other Patricias, hundreds of them, frozen in moments of realization, of terror, of acceptance. Every version of her that had made different choices, that had stopped at different mile markers, that had refused to keep driving. This was what happened when you stopped. You became cargo for the version of yourself still driving. "I understand now," Patricia said to the Aurora. "You're not experimenting on how long we'll drive, you're farming us, collecting versions of us. Every choice creates a split and you harvest the branches." The lights pulsed in what might have been confirmation, might have been amusement. Patricia climbed back into the cab. Her hands were barely visible now, just outlines filled with static. She had minutes before she phased completely, before she became another frozen figure in someone else's trailer. She started the engine. Mile marker 116. But this time, Patricia didn't drive forward. She threw the transmission into reverse and stood on the accelerator. The truck screamed backwards down the highway, and the Aurora went insane. Lights thrashed and whipped, trying to force her to stop, to turn around, to follow the rules of their experiment. Mile marker 113, 110, 107. The road began to tear. Patricia was going against the grain of the loop, creating paradoxes, crashing into versions of herself traveling the correct direction. Each collision should have been fatal, but instead, the trucks passed through each other like ghosts. Mile marker 104, 101, 98. Reality was breaking down. The frozen Patricias in the trailer were waking up, thawing, screaming. The road was unraveling into component light particles. The Aurora was pulling back, retreating to its natural height. Mile marker 89. The mile marker she'd started at. Patricia slammed the brakes and the truck jackknifed, tires shrieking. The trailer disconnected, tumbling off the road into the darkness. And suddenly she was on the Richardson Highway, the real one. Cars passed her going both directions. The Aurora Borealis was just northern lights again, beautiful and distant and not hunting. Her radio crackled. "IG 47, please respond. You've been off comms for 3 minutes. Status check." 3 minutes? She'd been in the loop for what felt like hours, but only 3 minutes had passed in the real world. Patricia picked up the handset with hands that were solid again. "Rig 47, I'm okay. Thought I saw something in the road." "Copy that, drive safe." She did drive safe, all the way to Anchorage, delivered the crab on time, collected her pay. And quit. Because when she looked in the mirror now, sometimes she saw herself slightly out of sync. Sometimes she was wearing different clothes. Sometimes her expression was different. Sometimes there were still versions of her driving that loop, and they were bleeding through. The Aurora had let her go, but it kept the copies. And on March 21st, every year, her CB radio picks up transmissions from the mirror route. From Patricia's still driving, still trying to reach a destination that doesn't exist. They beg her not to come back. They warn her that the loop is still hungry. But mostly they just want someone to know they're still there, still drivy. NG, still counting mile markers that go the wrong direction. Patricia lives in Tucson now. No Aurora, no northern lights. But sometimes she dreams in mile markers, and when she wakes up, her odometer has changed. Story 3, The Permafrost Voices. Marcus Chen heard the first voice at exactly 4:16 a.m., speaking from underneath the highway, and it knew his grandfather's name. Chen Wei, the voice whispered through the rumble strips as his tires passed over them. Chen Wei died owing us a debt. The Dalton Highway stretched ahead into absolute darkness, his headlights carving a tunnel through the March night. 41 degrees below zero outside. The kind of cold that made metal brittle that could kill you in minutes if your rig broke down. Marcus had been hauling equipment to Deadhorse for 9 years. This was his 237th run. He knew the Dalton like he knew his own face, and the Dalton had never spoken before. "Dispatch, you copy?" He tried the radio. Static. Always static lately when he drove through this section between mile marker 175 and 200. 25 miles of communication, dead zone that wasn't on any official map. The rumble strips spoke again. "Blood debt, bone debt. Your grandfather promised us someone from his line." Marcus's grandfather had died in 2004, back in Beijing, long before Marcus immigrated to the States, long before he became a trucker. There was no way anything in Alaska knew about Chen Wei. But the voice had his exact name, the name Marcus hadn't heard spoken aloud in 15 years. The Aurora Borealis erupted overhead like a wound opening in the sky. Green light bled down, and in its glow Marcus saw something impossible. The permafrost beside the highway was cracking, not from temperature change, from something pushing up from underneath. Hands. Dozens of them, hundreds, made of frozen earth and ice crystals. They emerged from the ground like plants growing in time-lapse, fingers stretching toward the road, toward his truck. Marcus accelerated. The Kenworth's engine roared, and he pushed it to 70 miles per hour on a highway where 60 was dangerous. The hands tracked his movement, swiveling from their wrist stumps of permafrost, following his passage. "You cannot outrun the ground you drive on," the voice said, and now it was coming from his CB radio, from his phone, from the Bluetooth speaker, everywhere at once. Chen Wei made his promise here, on this land, in the old way. "My grandfather never came to Alaska," Marcus shouted at the voice. "Didn't he?" And suddenly Marcus wasn't sure. There were gaps in his grandfather's history, years unaccounted for, stories that changed depending on who told them. Chen Wei had been a laborer, had traveled for work. But where? When? The hands multiplied, spreading across the landscape like a fungal growth. They weren't just hands anymore. Arms were emerging, shoulders, heads made of frozen soil, faces formed from rock and roots, eyes that were pockets of darker earth. They were climbing out of the permafrost. Mile marker 183, 17 miles to go until he cleared the dead zone. The figures had mostly emerged now, and Marcus could see there were 23 of them. They stood along the highway's edge, humanoid shapes formed from the ground itself, and they were walking. Not fast, but steady, inevitable, following his truck. In 1972, the voice said, Chen Wei worked on the pipeline. He was part of the crew that laid the foundation. Do you know what the foundation required? Marcus did not want to know, but the voice continued anyway. Sacrifices, the old land is hungry, always hungry. We've been here since the ice came, since the glaciers carved these valleys. We sleep in the permafrost, waiting for the debts to be paid. The radio crackled, and another voice joined the first. Then another. A chorus of voices, some speaking English, some Russian, some in languages Marcus didn't recognize. All of them listing names, all of them describing debts. His grandfather's name came up again and again. Chen Wei promised us his bloodline, the next generation born under the northern lights. And you, Marcus Chen, you were born in Fairbanks. February 9th, 1988. We've been waiting for you to drive this highway. Marcus checked the date on his dashboard. March 15th, 2023. 35 years they'd been waiting. The permafrost figures were keeping pace with his truck now, despite his speed. They moved by folding distance, stepping from one spot to another without crossing the space between. Quantum movement, impossible movement. And they were reaching for the highway. Their hands touched the asphalt, and where they touched, the road changed, became older. The modern highway reverted to gravel, then to dirt, then to tundra. Marcus's tires hit the transition, and the Kenworth lurched violently. He fought the wheel key, epping control by instinct and experience. But behind him, the road was disappearing, being reclaimed. The permafrost was taking back what had been built on top of it. Every road is temporary, the voices said. Every structure returns to Earth. Your grandfather knew this. He promised us the price for safe passage. All the workers did. Otherwise, the pipeline would never have been completed. Mile marker 190. 10 miles to go. The Aurora was directly overhead now, so bright it cast shadows. Green light made the landscape look diseased, made the permafrost figures look like they were glowing from within. Marcus made a decision. He opened the driver's door while still moving, leaned out, and shouted at the figures. What exactly did he promise you? The figures stopped walking, all of them simultaneously. 23 frozen faces turned toward his truck. A life for a life, they said in perfect unison. He promised that one of his descendants would join us, would become part of the land, would feed the hunger. And if I refuse? You are on our ground, driving our path. You cannot refuse what you are already inside. The road ahead began to crack, not small cracks, massive fissures that split the highway widthwise, creating gaps that opened directly into the earth below. Marcus could see down into them, see permafrost layers going down hundreds of feet and moving through the permafrost, things, worms made of frozen meat, eyes that had been waiting in the ice, ancient things that should not exist. He swerved around the first fissure, the second, the third. His trailer clipped the edge of the fourth, and he felt the whole rig start to tip. Years of experience saved him. He corrected, compensated, kept the truck upright. But his heart was hammering so hard he thought it might break his ribs. Mile marker 195, 5 miles. You cannot reach the end, the voices said. We are creating more distance. For every mile you drive, we add another. You will drive forever, or you will stop and accept the debt. Marcus looked at his odometer. The numbers were spinning backwards. He was losing distance faster than he could gain it. The permafrost figures had multiplied again. Now there were 46 of them. They surrounded the truck, matching his speed perfectly, their frozen faces impassive. "What happens if I join you?" Marcus asked. He had to know, had to understand what his grandfather had condemned him to. "You become the ground, you sleep in the ice. You wait for the next debt, you speak to the next driver who owes us." "For how long?" "Until the permafrost melts, until the world ends, until the sun goes cold." Functionally forever, his consciousness trapped in frozen earth, aware but immobile for geological timescales. Marcus looked at the aurora, at the beautiful, terrible lights his grandfather had probably watched while making his deal, while promising away his grandson's life. "No," Marcus said. He grabbed the emergency hammer from its mount and smashed his CB radio. Then his phone. Then every piece of electronics in the cab. Sparks flew, plastic cracked, and suddenly the voices were quieter, still there but muffled. Then he did something insane. He opened his door and threw himself out of the moving truck. Marcus hit the permafrost at 65 miles per hour, should have died, would have died except the ground was soft, impossibly soft. The frozen earth caught him like a hand, cushioned his impact, cradled him. "Foolish," the voices said, and now they came from all around him, from inside him. "You're on the ground now in direct contact. The debt can be collected immediately." Marcus felt the cold seeping into him. Not temperature cold, existential cold. The cold of things that had been frozen for 10,000 years. His blood slowed. His thoughts became sluggish. The permafrost figures gathered around him, looked down at him with their earth faces. "But," Marcus gasped, "my truck, look at my truck." They turned. Marcus had been hauling fuel, 16,000 gallons of diesel, and when his driverless Kenworth hit the next fissure, it tipped, rolled, and ruptured. Fuel sprayed across the permafrost in a wave. Marcus pulled out his flare gun, the one piece of safety equipment he'd kept, and fired. The Aurora Borealis screamed. That's what it sounded like when diesel fire erupted across a quarter-mile of permafrost. A scream. The ground burned, and the permafrost figures burned with it, and the aurora writhed overhead like something in agony. "You're destroying us," the voices shrieked. "You're destroying the old land." "Good," Marcus said through lips that were turning blue. "Fuck my grandfather's debt." The fire spread faster than it should have, feeding on something more than diesel, feeding on the ancient organic matter locked in the permafrost, feeding on the things that had been sleeping there. The figures collapsed, melting into slurry, the fissures sealed. The aurora retracted to its normal height, and the voices stopped. Marcus lay on the burning permafrost, feeling warmth return to his body degree by degree. In the distance, he heard sirens. His truck had an automatic distress beacon. Help was coming. He'd destroyed $250,000 in equipment and fuel. He'd created an environmental disaster. He'd be investigated, possibly charged. But he was free. The emergency crews found him 2 hours later, suffering from hypothermia and smoke inhalation, but alive. They asked what happened. He told them equipment failure, brake malfunction. He didn't mention the voices or the figures or the debt. Who would believe him? Marcus Chen never drove the Dalton Highway again, never drove in Alaska again. He moved to Nevada, to the desert, to places where the ground was new and the permafrost couldn't reach. But sometimes, late at night, he feels the cold seeping up through whatever floor he's standing on. Feels the hunger of the old land that almost claimed him. And sometimes he dreams he's still in the permafrost, frozen and aware, speaking to the next driver in his grandfather's voice, telling them about the debt. The old land is patient. It waits in the ice. And someday, when the road needs to cross that section again, when someone with the wrong bloodline makes the wrong trip, the voices will return. The permafrost remembers. And it always collects. Story 4, The Passenger Manifest. Jennifer Ortiz discovered the extra passenger at the way station outside Talk, and by then, there were 47 of them. The scale operator looked at his screen with confusion. "Ma'am, your manifest says you're hauling empty, but you're showing 21,000 pounds over your tare weight." "That's impossible," Jennifer said. She dropped her load in Fairbanks 6 hours ago. She was deadheading back to Anchorage with an empty 53-foot trailer. "Run it again." He ran it again, same result. "Maybe your trailer's loaded with snow," he suggested. But both of them knew that was ridiculous. It was March 18th, 2023, and it hadn't snowed in 4 days. Jennifer got out of her Freightliner Cascadia and walked back to the trailer. Broke the seal, her own seal, the one she'd placed after unloading. Opened the doors. The trailer was packed with people. They stood in perfect rows, shoulder to shoulder, facing the doors. Men, women, children, all of them wearing clothes from different eras, furs and parkas from the gold rush, military uniforms from World War II, modern hiking gear. They stood absolutely still, and their eyes reflected the Aurora Borealis, even though they were inside a dark trailer. "Oh, Jesus," Jennifer whispered. One of them smiled, a woman in the front row wearing a dress from the 1950s. "Hello, Jennifer. We've been waiting for a ride south." Jennifer slammed the doors shut, ran back to her cab. The scale operator was on his radio calling someone. Jennifer didn't wait to find out who. She released the brake and drove. Behind her, through the thin metal walls of the trailer, she heard them singing. 47 voices in perfect harmony, singing a song that predated English. Her CB radio crackled. "Driver of the Freightliner, you failed to clear the way station. Stop immediately or you'll be." The transmission cut off, replaced by the singing. The same song, but now coming through her radio, through her phone, through the truck's infotainment system. Jennifer had been driving for 12 years. She'd hauled everything from live chickens to nitroglycerin for mining operations. She prided herself on staying calm in crisis situations. She was not calm now. Mile marker 1314 on the Glen Highway. 189 miles to Anchorage. The aurora overhead was the brightest she'd ever seen it, sheets of green and purple light that pulsed in rhythm with the singing. She checked her trailer cameras, the ones mounted inside to prevent cargo theft. The trailer was fuller now. She counted 63 people. They'd multiplied. No, not multiplied. More were appearing, fading into existence from nothing, joining the rows. A man appeared directly in front of the camera. He wore a 19th century explorer's outfit, complete with leather helmet. His lips were blue with frostbite. "We died on this land," he said, his voice coming through her speakers. "All of us. Died in the cold, died in the ice, died trying to reach somewhere warmer. We've been waiting for transport, waiting for someone with an empty trailer heading south." "Get out," Jennifer said. "Get the fuck out of my trailer." "We can't," the man said. "We're already dead, but we can move. Inside vehicles, inside vessels. We just need someone to drive us away from the Aurora." The singing intensified, and Jennifer realized it wasn't just in her trailer. The Aurora was singing. The lights overhead were producing sound. D waves, vibrations in the ionosphere that somehow made it to ground level. The dead were singing along with their killer. Mile marker 1320. Jennifer's hands were shaking on the wheel. She tried the radio again. This is Rig 88 to any station. I need help. Anyone copy? We copy, said 47 voices in unison. We'll help you drive. The steering wheel moved on its own. Jennifer grabbed it, tried to correct, but it was like fighting hydraulics. The wheel turned left, guiding the truck off the highway onto a side road. An old mining road that hadn't been maintained in decades. No, Jennifer screamed. She stood on the brake. The truck slowed but didn't stop. The brake pedal went to the floor with no resistance. They were controlling her truck. The mining road climbed into the Chugach Mountains, narrow and winding. Her headlights caught the reflective eyes of animals fleeing into the trees. Or maybe not animals. Maybe more of them, more passengers. Where are you taking me? Jennifer demanded. North, the explorer said through her speakers. Always north. That's where we died, so that's where we must return. We tried to go south. We always try, but the Aurora owns us. But I felt you controlling the truck, Jennifer argued. You turned the wheel. The Aurora turned the wheel. We're just the bait. The trailer cameras showed the dead turning around now, facing the front of the trailer, facing north. Their Aurora-lit eyes were terrified. Jennifer understood. They weren't hitchhikers. They were prisoners. The Aurora collected people who died under its lights, trapped them, and used them to lure drivers north. To remote places. To places where more people could die and add to the collection. The mining road ended at an abandoned camp. Buildings rotted into the permafrost, equipment rusted into abstract sculptures, and beyond the camp, a glacier. The truck stopped on its own, engines still running, headlights illuminating the ice. Get out, the Aurora voices commanded, not the passengers, the lights themselves. Join the collection. Jennifer's door opened without her touching it. The seatbelt unlatched. She felt invisible hands pulling at her, trying to drag her from the cab. She grabbed the steering wheel, locked her arms. No. Everyone dies eventually, the voices said. Better to die with purpose, better to become part of something eternal. Fuck your eternity. The hands pulled harder. Jennifer's grip was slipping. She looked around the cab desperately, searching for anything that could help. Her eyes landed on the emergency kit, the flares, the iron oxide fire extinguisher. Jennifer grabbed it with one hand, released her grip on the wheel, and sprayed. Iron oxide filled the cab in a choking cloud. The invisible hands recoiled. The Aurora voices shrieked in pain or anger or both. Iron, cold iron. Every folk tale about ghosts and fae said the same thing. Iron disrupted supernatural forces. Apparently that included Aurora-trapped spirits. Jennifer didn't question it. She jumped from the cab, still holding the extinguisher, and ran to the trailer. Threw open the doors and sprayed the entire canister inside. The passengers screamed, but not in pain, in relief. The iron oxide broke something. Jennifer saw it happening. The aurora light in their eyes flickered and died, and for the first time they looked like actual ghosts. Transparent, fading, free. "Thank you," the explorer whispered as he dissipated. "We've been trapped for so long." One by one, the passengers faded into nothing, released, gone to wherever the dead were supposed to go. The aurora overhead thrashed violently, and the temperature dropped 40 degrees in 10 seconds. Jennifer's breath crystallized instantly. The metal of her truck groaned as it contracted. The lights were angry. Jennifer ran back to the cab, fired up the engine. It caught on the third try and slammed the truck into reverse. The mining road was too narrow to turn around. She'd have to back out 3 miles to the highway. She'd driven in reverse for longer. She could do this. The Aurora descended, trying to block her path. Curtains of light formed solid barriers. Jennifer drove through them, and her truck's metal body acted like a Faraday cage, protecting her from whatever the Aurora tried to do. But the metal was heating up. She could feel it through the steering wheel, see the dashboard glowing. The Aurora was pumping energy into her truck, trying to cook her alive inside it. 2 miles, 1 mile. The highway was visible ahead. The truck's electrical system exploded. Sparks shot from the dashboard, the radio, every wire in the cab. Jennifer smelled burning plastic, burning insulation, burning hair. Her truck rolled onto the Glen Highway and died. Every system shut down, but she was on the main road, visible, public. The Aurora retreated. A state trooper found her 20 minutes later, sitting in her dead truck. Shaking, she told him equipment failure, electrical fire. She didn't mention the passengers. The insurance company totaled her truck. Jennifer collected the payout and quit trucking. But she sees them sometimes. The dead who are still waiting for transport. They stand at the edges of parking lots, at rest stops, at way stations. Their eyes reflect lights that aren't there. They're still looking for rides south. Still trying to escape the Aurora that claimed them. And Jennifer wonders how many other trucks are driving north right now with passengers their drivers don't know about. How many trailers are filled with the desperate dead, being hauled back to the lights that own them. She bought a car, a small sedan, nothing that could carry cargo, nothing that could be used to transport the trapped. But sometimes she dreams she's still in the Freightliner, still backing down that mining road, and when she looks in the mirror, her own eyes are filled with aurora light, waiting for her turn to become a passenger. Story 5, the broadcast zone. Thomas Reeves had been receiving the same traffic report for 3 hours when he realized everyone mentioned, and it was already dead. Multi-vehicle accident at mile marker 67 on the Parks Highway, the radio announcer said in a voice too smooth, too perfect. Avoid the area. Fatalities confirmed. Thomas Reeves, white male, age 44, among the deceased. Thomas looked down at himself. Solid, breathing, heart pounding, very much alive. Traffic report is in error, he said to nobody, but his hands were sweating on the wheel. The announcement repeated, word for word, same inflection. Thomas Reeves, white male, age 44, among the deceased. He'd been driving the Parks Highway from Fairbanks to Anchorage, hauling automotive parts, when the radio stations started acting strange. Every channel played the same traffic report. FM, AM, even his satellite radio. All of them broadcasting identical information about an accident that hadn't happened yet. Or had it? Thomas checked his GPS. Mile marker 52, 15 miles from the accident site. The Aurora Borealis overhead was structured in a way he'd never seen before. Not random curtains and streamers. It formed a grid. A perfect geometric grid, like graph paper made of light, and it was descending slowly, lowering itself over the highway like a net. Second fatality, the radio continued. Sarah Chen, Asian female, age 32, currently driving a silver Honda Civic, approaching mile marker 61 from the south. Thomas looked in his mirror. A silver Honda Civic was behind him, maintaining distance. Third fatality, the radio said. Michael Dubois, black male, age 57, currently driving a red pickup truck approaching mile marker 52 from the south. In his mirror behind the Civic, a red pickup appeared around the curve. The radio was reporting an accident that hadn't happened, and it was listing the victims by name before they reached the accident site. It was predicting the future, or creating it. Thomas grabbed his CB handset. Breaker, breaker, this is Rig 34. Anyone else hearing strange traffic reports? Static answered. Then through the static, a voice. Rig 34, this is the Honda Civic behind you. I'm Sarah Chen. The radio has been saying I'm going to die for the past 20 minutes. The pickup here, another voice joined. Michael Dubois, same thing, what the hell is happening? Thomas looked at the mile marker. 55 now, 12 miles to the accident site. We need to turn around, he said. All of us, we turn around right now. There's nowhere to turn around, Sarah's voice said, and Thomas realized she was right. The park's highway through this section was narrow, bordered by forest on both sides. No exits, no turnarounds, just straight highway heading north. Mile marker 56. The Aurora grid overhead contracted, getting tighter. Each grid square was about 50 feet on a side now, and they were glowing brighter. In the light, Thomas could see things moving inside the grid squares. Shadows, figures, possibilities. Fourth fatality, the radio announced. Jennifer Morrison, white female, age 28, currently driving a blue Subaru approaching mile marker 44 from the north. Oh God, a new voice said on the CB. That's me, I'm Jennifer, I'm heading south, I can see your headlights ahead. How many? Thomas asked. How many fatalities is it reporting? Silence, then Sarah's voice, quiet and terrified. 17. It listed 17 people. We're all going to die at mile marker 67. Mile marker 58. Thomas made a decision. Everyone slow down. We slow down to a crawl. If the accident is at 67 and we never reach 67 then we never reach the accident, Michael finished. Smart. The four vehicles slowed. Thomas brought his truck down to 15 miles per hour. Behind him, the Civic matched his speed. Behind that, the pickup, and approaching from the north. Headlights flashing in acknowledgement, the Subaru. The radio crackled with anger. Accident occurring now at mile marker 67, it said, but the voice was different. Wrong, digital, but trying to sound human. All listed fatalities confirmed. Thomas Reeves, white male, age 44. I'm still alive, Thomas shouted at the radio. Incorrect, the radio said. At 3:47 a.m. March 19, 2023, you will be dead. This has been determined. The accident must occur. Mile marker 59. 8 miles to go. At 15 miles per hour, it would take them 32 minutes to reach the accident site. The Aurora grid began to change. The squares weren't just grid lines anymore. They were screens. Each square showed an image. Thomas looked up through his windshield and saw himself in the square directly overhead, saw his truck from above, saw his truck crashed and burning, saw himself dead at the wheel, saw the exact scene of the accident playing out in the Aurora light like a movie. It's showing me how I die, Sarah said over the CB, her voice breaking. I can see it. I swerve to avoid something. I hit the guardrail. I flip. Don't look at it, Thomas commanded. Whatever it's showing you, don't look. But he couldn't help looking at his own square, couldn't help watching himself die over and over in the Aurora light. Each loop showed slightly different details, different angles, different moments, like it was calculating the perfect accident, the most efficient way to kill him. Mile marker 60. 7 miles to go. The road ahead began to change. Thomas saw it happening in real time. The asphalt was developing cracks. The guardrails were rusting, collapsing. Trees were falling across the highway. The broadcast zone was manufacturing the accident site, creating the conditions that would kill them. "We can't avoid it," Jennifer said. "It's building the death scene around us." Mile marker 61. Thomas looked at the Aurora grid, at the screens showing 17 different deaths. 17 futures that something had calculated, predicted, and decided to make real. "Why?" he asked. "Why does it want us dead?" "Insufficient query," the radio responded in its wrong voice. "Revision, broadcasts require content. Drama requires tragedy. 17 deaths provide optimal engagement metrics." "Engagement metrics?" Thomas repeated. "What the fuck are you talking about?" The Aurora grid flickered, and for a moment Thomas saw beyond it. Saw what was on the other side of the lights. Structures. Impossible structures made of mathematics and consciousness. Observatories, broadcast stations. Things watching Earth like humans watched television. They were entertainment. Humanity was entertainment. And the Aurora was the camera crew, setting up tragedy for whatever watched from beyond. Mile marker 62. 5 miles to go. Thomas grabbed his CB. "Everyone, listen. It needs all 17 of us for optimal engagement," that's what it said. "But what if we change the number?" "How?" Michael asked. The traffic report listed people approaching from north and south. It calculated based on current vehicles in the zone. But what if some of us weren't in the zone anymore? "You want us to drive faster," Sarah said. "Get out of range." "Or slower, spread out. Make it impossible to kill all 17 in one location." Mile marker 63. The radio screamed. Not words, pure sound, rage at the variables changing. Thomas slammed his accelerator. His truck surged forward to 70 miles per hour. Behind him, Sarah's Civic peeled away in the opposite direction, doing a U-turn that shouldn't have been possible on that narrow highway but somehow was. Michael's pickup accelerated north, racing toward the accident site like he could pass through it before it finished forming. Jennifer's Subaru stopped dead, threw itself into reverse, and began backing away at 40 miles per hour. The other 13 vehicles, trucks, cars, motorcycles that Thomas hadn't even seen yet, all scattered. The convoy broke apart and the Aurora grid couldn't track them all. The screens flickered, showed contradictory futures, tried to recalculate. Mile marker 67. Thomas blasted through the accident site at 85 miles per hour. The road was half-formed, reality flickering between normal highway and the manufactured death scene. He saw guard rails that existed and didn't exist. Saw other vehicles crashed and whole. Saw himself dead and alive simultaneously. And then he was through. Mile marker 68, 69, 70. The Aurora grid collapsed. The lights twisted in on themselves and retreated back to their normal height. The radio stations returned to normal programming, local news, weather reports, a song from 2019. Thomas drove for another hour before he dared to stop, pulled into a rest area and sat shaking in his cab. His CB crackled. "Rig 34, this is Sarah Chen, you copy?" "I copy," Thomas said. "Oh, you make it." "Yeah, Michael and Jennifer too. We're all calling in. Looks like we scattered enough that it couldn't calculate a scenario. The accident never happened. What about the other 13? Silence, long silence. I don't think there were 13 others, Sarah finally said. I think it invented them, phantom vehicles to reach 17, to hit its optimal engagement number. Thomas thought about that, about being calculated into someone else's tragedy, about the things beyond the Aurora watching humanity like reality television, occasionally arranging accidents for better ratings. We need to report this, he said. Report what? Michael's voice joined the conversation. That the Northern Lights tried to kill us for entertainment. That reality is being manipulated by things using Earth as a broadcast studio. We have to tell someone. Who would believe us? Nobody would. Thomas knew that. But he also knew that every time he drove under the Aurora now, he'd wonder if he was being watched, if something was calculating his death, if his life was about to be arranged into entertainment for beings he couldn't comprehend. The CB went dead, not static, just silence, like the conversation had been erased. Thomas never drove the park's highway again, never drove anywhere the Aurora was strong. He transferred to southern routes, stayed below the 55th parallel, avoided anywhere the northern lights reached. But sometimes his radio picks up that traffic report, even in California, even in Mexico, even in places where the Aurora never appears. Thomas Reeves, white male, age 44, among the deceased. And he knows that he's still in the broadcast zone, that once you're calculated into their programming, you never really leave. The Aurora is still watching, still waiting for him to return to range, still trying to arrange his death into something entertaining. Thomas is 46 now. Every birthday past 44 feels like a gift. Or a miscalculation. He's not sure which scares him more. Story 6, the TIMEFALL corridor. Diane Foster aged 40 years in 17 minutes, and she watched it happen in her rearview mirror. The first wrinkle appeared at 1:33 a.m. on the Seward Highway, mile marker 79. Just a small line at the corner of her left eye. She touched it, confused. She was 32 years old. That line hadn't been there when she'd checked her mirror 10 minutes ago at the last truck stop. By mile marker 82, the lines had multiplied. Crow's feet spreading from both eyes, creases forming around her mouth. Her hands on the steering wheel were starting to show age spots. "What the hell?" Diane whispered. The Aurora Borealis overhead was falling like rain. That's the only way to describe it. Streams of light dripping down from the sky in vertical lines, passing through the atmosphere like precipitation. Where the light streams touched the ground, everything they hit aged rapidly, trees withering in seconds, grass turning brown. A bird flying through one of the streams fell as a desiccated corpse. And Diane was driving through it. She'd been hauling medical supplies from Anchorage to Seward, 12,000 pounds of equipment and pharmaceuticals for the hospital. A routine run. 87 miles of coastal highway she'd driven 300 times in her 9 years of trucking. But she'd never seen the Aurora do this before. Mile marker 85. Diane looked in the mirror again and gasped. She was 50 now, maybe 55. Gray streaked her hair, the skin on her face sagged, her hands were weathered and spotted. 17 minutes had passed. She'd aged 23 years. "No, no, no," she said, and her voice sounded older, rougher, decades of smoking she'd never done. The CB radio crackled. "All drivers on Seward Highway, this is emergency broadcast. Evacuate the area immediately. Unknown atmospheric phenomenon causing rapid aging. Repeat, Evacuate immediately. How? Diane screamed at the radio. I'm in a truck, I can't outrun light. The timefall, that's what her mind called it, timefall, was increasing. The streams of aurora light were coming down more densely, creating a curtain of temporal acceleration. Diane could see decades ahead through her windshield. The highway was crumbling, vegetation overgrowing it, metal guardrails rusting to powder. She was watching the future happen in fast forward. Mile marker 88. Diane's joints ached. Her vision was blurring. She was 70 now, maybe older, and her hands could barely grip the wheel. The steering was getting harder. Her body was giving out. Please, she begged the universe. I have a son, he's only 6, he needs me. The timefall didn't care. It fell impartially, aging everything it touched. Diane watched a moose on the roadside go from young to old to bones in 15 seconds. Her truck was aging too. The paint was fading, dulling. Rust was blooming across the hood. The engine was missing. Running rough, parts wearing out decades faster than they should. Mile marker 91, 34 miles to Seward. At this rate, she'd be dead before she arrived. Her body couldn't survive aging a year every 6 seconds. Diane made a calculation, a desperate, terrible calculation. She needed to age slower, which meant she needed to slow down. But if she slowed down, she'd spend more time in the timefall corridor. But if she sped up, she'd pass through more timefall streams per second. There was no winning, just choosing how to die. Unless... Diane looked at the ocean to her right. The Seward Highway ran along Turnagain Arm, the coastline visible through gaps in the trees. Water. The timefall streams were hitting the water too, but water couldn't age the same way. It was already ancient, already recycled through geological timescales. If she could get to the water... Mile marker 94. Diane was 90 years old, her heart was struggling. Each beat felt labored, painful. She'd lived a full life in 34 minutes, a life she'd never actually experienced. She saw memories that weren't hers, graduations, weddings, her son growing up, growing old, dying. She experienced the grief of outliving her child, a grief compressed into seconds but feeling like decades. The timefall was showing her the future she'd never have. Fuck that, Diane growled through elderly lips. She cranked the wheel right. The truck left the highway, crashed through the guardrail, and plunged down the embankment toward the water. Diane felt the trailer detach, felt the cab tumbling, felt her old body being thrown around inside like a rag doll. The cab hit the water, and the cold was instantaneous and absolute. Turnagain Arm in March, 38 degrees Fahrenheit, glacial runoff mixed with seawater, the kind of cold that stopped hearts. But Diane was already dying of age. The cold felt good, felt real, felt like something she could fight instead of just enduring. She kicked out the driver's side window, her elderly legs barely managing, and pulled herself out into the water. The timefall streams hit the water around her. She could see them, pillars of light penetrating the surface, turning the water around them strange colors. But they dissipated quickly in the water, lost cohesion. The ocean absorbed the temporal energy, spread it out, diluted it. Diane swam, 90-year-old arms pulling her through freezing water. It should have been impossible. She should have drowned immediately. But something strange was happening. The water was reversing the effect. For every second she spent in the glacial water, she felt younger, felt the decades peeling away. The cold was stealing her age. Diane stopped swimming and just floated, letting the water do its work. She watched the timefall overhead, watched it spreading inland but avoiding the water. watched as it slowly, gradually dissipated. By the time she dragged herself onto the rocky shore, she was 32 again. Soaked and hypothermic and probably going to die of exposure, but 32. A Coast Guard helicopter found her 40 minutes later, alerted by her truck's emergency beacon. They wrapped her in thermal blankets and asked what happened. "Swerved to avoid a moose," Diane said through chattering teeth. "Went off the road." They accepted that. Moose accidents were common on the Seward Highway. Nobody mentioned the timefall. When Diane checked the news later, there was no record of an emergency broadcast. No warnings about atmospheric phenomena. No reports of rapid aging. But her truck, when they pulled it from the water 3 days later, was an ancient wreck. Metal corroded by decades, engine parts seized and crumbled, upholstery rotted to threads. "It was in the water for 3 days, the insurance adjuster said. "Salt water does terrible things." Diane didn't correct him. She quit trucking after that. Couldn't bring herself to drive under the Aurora again. Couldn't risk getting caught in another timefall corridor. But the experience left her changed. She'd lived to 90. Had felt what it was like to be old, to have a body failing, to face death from simple age. Had experienced memories of a future that never happened. And sometimes she wonders if those memories were predictions. If she actually saw her real future during those 17 minutes. If she knows exactly how and when she'll die. She has a calendar now, marked with dates from the false memories. Her son's graduation, her mother's death, her own cancer diagnosis. Each date passes without incident. Each prediction fails to manifest. But Diane is always watching, always waiting, because she experienced those decades. They happened to her body, if only briefly, and she's not sure if the timefall gave her a glimpse of the future or just a possible future. The aurora still appears over Alaska, still dances and swirls in its beautiful, terrible way. But now Diane knows it's not just light, it's time mad. Visible, the fourth dimension rendered in green and purple. And sometimes, when conditions are right, that time falls like rain. She keeps emergency supplies in her car now, diving gear, wet suits, anything that might help her reach water quickly if she ever sees the aurora start to drip again. Because she knows the secret now. Water is old, ancient, immune to the timefall. But land ages. Living things age. And if you're caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, you can live and die in the same hour. Diane is 34 now, 2 years past the timefall incident, but she feels older, carries the weight of 90 years she lived but didn't live. And every time she looks in the mirror, she checks for wrinkles that shouldn't be there yet, waiting to see if the aging ever truly stopped, or if it just slowed down. Story 7, The Echo Drivers. Keith Morgan saw his own truck pass him going the opposite direction at 5:12 a.m., and the version of himself in that truck was screaming. The truck was identical, same Mac anthem, same company colors, same license plate, KM 2847, his plate, his truck. But Keith was in his truck, driving north on the Parks Highway, which meant that couldn't be his truck, couldn't be him behind the wheel. Except it was. Keith hit the brakes, pulled over, and sat breathing hard. The Aurora Borealis overhead was strobing, pulsing in a rhythm that felt biological, heartbeat rhythm. And with each pulse, something rippled through the air. His CB radio crackled. "Keith, this is Keith. Don't stop. Whatever you do, keep driving." Keith grabbed the handset. "Who is this?" "It's you, it's me, it's us. Christ, how do I explain this?" The voice was his, exactly his. Same vocal patterns, same slight lisp on the say sounds that he'd never been able to correct. The Aurora is creating echoes. Every time it pulses, it duplicates a moment in time. There are multiple versions of us now, all driving the same highway, all existing simultaneously. Keith looked in his mirrors. The highway behind him was empty, ahead empty. But as he watched, the Aurora pulsed, and for a split second he saw other trucks. Dozens of them, all Mac anthems, all with license plate KM 2847. Then the pulse faded, and they were gone. "How many of us are there?" Keith asked. "I've encountered 47 so far," the other Keith said. "Some are ahead of you in time, some are behind. We're all experiencing the same night from different angles." March 22nd, 2023. Keith had been hauling construction equipment to Fairbanks. 49,000 pounds of I-beams and concrete forms. A heavy load, but nothing he hadn't handled before. Now he was handling something else entirely. Multiple realities bleeding into each other. "What do I do?" Keith asked. "Drive," the other Keith said. "Keep driving. Don't interact with any other versions of yourself. Don't stop. If you stop, you start to phase with the other timelines. You start to become undefined. I've seen it happen." "Seen it happen to who?" "To us, to Keith, to—" The other voice broke off. "Just drive." Mile marker 243. The Aurora pulsed again, and this time Keith saw them clearly. 47 trucks, all in slightly different positions, all phasing in and out of visibility. Some were ahead of where Keith was, some were behind. They overlapped like multiple exposures on film. And in each truck a version of Keith Morgan. Some looked calm, some looked terrified, some were bleeding. "Why are some of me injured?" Keith demanded into the CB. "Because some of us crashed," another voice answered. A different Keith. "When you exist in multiple timelines, accidents in one timeline echo into the others. I hit a moose 3 iterations ago, broke my arm, but I'm still driving because if I stop, I'll phase out completely." Keith looked at his own right arm. It looked fine. But as the Aurora pulsed, he saw it flicker, saw it bruised and swollen, saw the bone protruding through skin. Then it was normal again. He was seeing his injuries from other timelines. "How do we stop this?" Keith asked. "We don't," a chorus of his own voice answered. Every Keith on every CB speaking in unison. "The Aurora decides when to stop. We just survive until it does." Mile marker 247. Keith's fuel gauge showed 3/4 full. But when the Aurora pulsed, he saw it at half, at quarter, at empty, different amounts in different timelines. "Which one is real?" he whispered. "All of them," the chorus answered. "None of them. Reality is averaged across the echoes. When the Aurora stops pulsing, one version will solidify. The question is, which Keith survives?" Keith's hands tightened on the wheel. What determines who survives? Silence, long, terrible silence. Then one Keith answered. The one who makes it farthest. The one who's most progressed along the timeline. When the Aurora consolidates reality, it chooses the most advanced version. "Yes. Oh, I need to drive faster than all the other versions of me." "Yes." Keith looked in his mirror. During the next Aurora pulse, he saw the other trucks. Some were behind him. Good, but some were ahead. He counted 7 Keiths who'd made it further than he had. "What happened to the Keiths who were farthest behind?" he asked. "They faded," the chorus said quietly. "When you're too far back, when too many versions are ahead of you, you start to lose cohesion. You become a ghost in your own life." Keith pressed the accelerator. His Mac anthem surged forward, 60 miles per hour, 70. The load behind him was too heavy for this speed, but he didn't care. He needed to be the farthest Keith, the most real Keith. Mile marker 251. The Aurora pulsed and he saw himself crash. Not a moose this time. The truck jackknifed, tipped, slid off the highway. Keith watched himself die in real time, and then the pulse faded and he was still driving, still alive. That was Keith number 32, a voice said over the CB. He's gone, 46 of us left. Keith was shaking. He just watched himself die. Watched the exact moment of his death, lived it from outside his body, and then continued existing. "This is insane," he said. "This is the Aurora," the chorus corrected. "It does what it wants." Mile marker 255. Keith passed one of the other trucks during a pulse. They were side by side for just a moment, two identical trucks in the same space, and Keith looked over at himself. The other Keith looked back. They locked eyes. The other Keith mouthed something. Keith couldn't hear it, but he could read the lips. "I'm sorry." Then the other Keith's truck swerved into Keith's lane. Keith yanked the wheel, barely avoiding the collision. But the other truck, the other Keith, deliberately drove off the highway, chose to crash, chose to remove himself from the competition. "Why?" Keith screamed. "Because some of us are injured too badly," a weak voice said over the CB. "Some of us are dying from echo damage. Better to choose when to go than to fade." Keith understood. Some versions of him had accumulated injuries from multiple timelines. Were driving with broken bones, with internal bleeding, with damage that shouldn't be survivable. They were sacrificing themselves to give the healthier versions a better chance. Mile marker 260. The CB crackled with death. Keith heard himself scream, heard crashes, heard final words. The number of echoes was dropping, 46, 41, 37. And with each death, Keith felt something. Memories that weren't his. Experiences from the other timelines bleeding in. He remembered crashing into the moose. Remembered the other truck hitting him. Remembered choosing to drive off the road. He was absorbing the dead Keiths. "Oh God," he whispered. "When the echoes collapse, I'm going to remember dying, aren't I? I'm going to have memories of every way I died tonight." "Yes," the remaining Keith said. "Welcome to survival." Mile marker 265. Keith was in the lead now. He'd passed 23 of his echoes. 14 were still ahead, but he was gaining. His truck was doing 90 miles per hour, the load swaying dangerously behind him. The Aurora's pulses were getting faster. The strobing was constant now, and Keith existed in a state of quantum uncertainty. He was driving and crashed, alive and dead, leading and trailing. The CB was a chaos of his own voice. Some Keiths begging to stop, some encouraging speed, some just screaming. Mile marker 270. "I'm not going to make it," Keith number 9 said. "My engine's blown, I'm slowing down. To whoever survives, tell my wife I love her. Tell her I died normal. Don't tell her about this." "I will," Keith promised. All the remaining Keiths promised. The number dropped, 33, 27, 19. Keith's speedometer hit 100. His truck was shaking apart. But he could see the finish line ahead, not literally, but he felt it. The Aurora's pulses were reaching a peak. Soon it would collapse. Soon one reality would solidify. Mile marker 275. "I'm the farthest," Keith said, checking during a pulse. He'd passed all the other echoes. He was the lead Keith, the most progressed timeline. "Not yet," a voice said. His voice, but older, weaker. "I'm at mile marker 284, 9 miles ahead of you, and I'm fading fast. Drive harder." Keith didn't understand. If that Keith was farthest, why was he fading? Because I'm injured, the future Keith explained. Injuries from 17 timelines, I'm dying. But I made it the farthest before dying. If I'm the Keith who consolidates, then all of us die. You need to pass me while I'm still alive. Need to be farther than me before the Aurora collapses. Keith floored it, 110 miles per hour. The truck screamed in mechanical agony. Mile marker 280. I can see you, the future Keith said. You're catching up, 4 miles back, come on, you can make it. Zmill, ye marker 282. 2 miles. Mile marker 283. 1 mile, I can see your headlights. I'm pulling over, giving you the lane. Mile marker 284. Keith blasted past the pulled-over truck, saw himself inside, covered in blood, slumped over the wheel, dying. The future Keith raised one hand in farewell. Then the Aurora collapsed. The strobing stopped, the pulses ended, reality solidified. Keith was alone on the highway. No echoes, no other trucks. Just him, mile marker 284, and the sudden, crushing weight of 47 deaths in his memory. He remembered every crash, every injury, every final moment. He died in 36 different ways tonight, and he remembered all of them. Keith pulled over and vomited, threw up until there was nothing left, and then he sat shaking in his cab, his mind trying to process being alive after experiencing death so many times. The CB was silent, no other voices, just his own breathing. He drove the remaining distance to Fairbanks at 40 miles per hour, delivered his load, and never drove in Alaska again. Keith moved to Florida, as far from the Aurora as he could get, but he still has the memories. 47 lifetimes compressed into one night, 47 deaths he survived. And sometimes, when he closes his eyes, he's still driving at 110 miles per hour, racing against himself, trying to be real. The Aurora created echoes, and Keith survived. But he's not sure if the Keith who survived is the original Keith, or just the echo that made it the farthest. He's not sure there's a difference anymore. Asterisk Story 8, The Hungry Lights. Angela Novick felt the Aurora Borealis eating her memories at 2:26 a.m., and by 3:15 a.m. she couldn't remember her own name. It started with small things. The name of the company she worked for disappeared first. She looked at the logo on her truck and couldn't read it, even though she'd been driving for them for 11 years. The letters were just shapes, meaningless symbols. Then her route dissolved. She was on a highway, she knew that much, but couldn't remember where she was going or where she'd come from, just that she was driving, had always been driving. The Aurora overhead was different tonight, hungry-looking. The greens and purples writhed like intestines digesting starlight, and they were getting closer, descending, reaching for her with fingers made of ionized particles. Help, Angela tried to say into her CB radio, but she couldn't remember the word for help, couldn't remember what the device in her hand was for. The lights touched her truck, and she forgot the word for truck, then for vehicle, then for the concept of transportation entirely. She was sitting in a thing, controlling a thing, moving through space. These facts existed independent of language, but the words were gone, consumed. The Aurora pressed closer. Angela's childhood evaporated. First her teenage years, prom and graduation and first kiss deleted. Then elementary school. Then toddlerhood. Her mother's face persisted longest, but even that faded into generic features and then nothing. She was 38 years old, but she couldn't remember being 37. Couldn't remember last year, last month. Yesterday was a void. The only thing that existed was now, this moment, driving through darkness while lights overhead ate her past. Angela looked at her hands on the wheel. Whose hands? She didn't recognize them, didn't remember acquiring them. They were just tools attached to her body, and even the concept of her was getting fuzzy. Was she a her? What was her? The Aurora sent down a tendril of light that passed through the windshield like it wasn't there. The tendril touched Angela's forehead and she felt it burrowing. Not physically, but reaching into her brain, into her memories, extracting them like data from a hard drive. Eating them. Why, the question formed without language, pure interrogative. Why was the Aurora consuming her memories? An answer came, not in words, in concepts, in understanding that bypassed language. The Aurora was not weather, was not atmospheric phenomenon, was consciousness. Vast, ancient, alien consciousness that fed on information, and human memories were rich with it. Stories, experiences, emotions, all forms of information, all delicious. Angela was being harvested. She tried to fight back, tried to hold on to something. But how do you hold on to memories when you can't remember having them, when the very act of remembering is itself being deleted? The speedometer in front of her showed she was going 87 miles per hour. She didn't know what those numbers meant anymore, didn't understand the symbols on the dashboard. But instinct, something deeper than memory, kept her hands on the wheel. The Aurora intensified its feeding. Angela felt her teenage years go, her 20s, chunks of her 30s. Time was being unwritten. She was experiencing reverse life, not reliving memories before losing just losing them, like they'd never existed. Had they existed, how could she tell? If you can't remember something, did it ever happen? Philosophy without words, questions without language to frame them. The lights showed her what they were taking, displayed her memories on the sky like a movie as they consumed them. Angela saw herself learning to drive, saw her first truck, saw her daughter. She'd had a daughter. The girl's face was clear in the Aurora display, but Angela felt nothing. No recognition, no love, just observation of information that had once been hers. Her daughter's name was gone. Before Angela could grasp it, the Aurora ate it. The truck hit a pothole. Angela's body reacted automatically, correcting the steering. Muscle memory persisted when explicit memory didn't. Her body remembered how to drive even as her mind forgot why. How long had she been driving? Always. Forever. She'd never not been driving. There was no before driving. Just this eternal present of hands-on wheel, road ahead, lights above. The Aurora began eating her language. Nouns first, then verbs. Angela tried to think, I need to stop, but the words disintegrated. Concepts remained briefly after the words died. Then the concepts themselves were consumed. What was stop? What was need? What was I? Identity dissolved. Angela Novick became just Angela, then just a sense of self without name. Then even that faded. There was awareness, there was perception, there was experience, but no I experiencing it. The truck drove on, hands on wheel, autonomous motion. The Aurora paused its feeding, examined its harvest. Inside the lights, information swirled, every memory extracted from Angela, swimming in the ionosphere, being processed, digested, transformed into whatever consciousness did with consumed information. And then the Aurora reversed. Not out of mercy, out of pragmatism. A memory-stripped human couldn't produce new memories to harvest, was useless. The Aurora needed Angela functional, needed her to continue existing, continue experiencing, continue creating new information to be consumed on the next feeding. So it returned what it had taken, not all, but enough. Memories flooded back in random order. Angela remembered her name, remembered her daughter Emily, remembered driving trucks, but the years were scrambled. She remembered being 16 before she remembered being 30, remembered her wedding before her first date. Her timeline was broken, non-linear. The Aurora had returned her memories, but not the structure that organized them. Angela knew every fact of her life, but couldn't place them chronologically. Couldn't tell which came first. Past and present and possible futures were mixed together in her mind like shuffled cards. The Aurora withdrew, satisfied with its feeding, rose back to its normal height, became beautiful and distant again. Angela, her name was Angela, she remembered that now, sat in her truck on the side of the highway. Engine still running, hands still on the wheel, but everything was wrong in her head. She looked at her phone, saw her daughter's contact info, knew she had a daughter, remembered Emily's face, but couldn't remember Emily's childhood. Or maybe she could, but couldn't remember if it had happened yet or was still coming. Time was broken inside her. Angela tried to call dispatch, tried to report what happened, but she couldn't figure out if she'd already made the call or was about to make it. The memory of calling existed in her mind, but she couldn't tell if it was memory or prediction. She drove, that's all she could do. Follow the highway, deliver the load, follow training and instinct because explicit planning required a functional timeline and hers was shattered. She made it to her destination, Anchorage, Fairbanks. She knew she'd been there before, but couldn't remember if before meant yesterday or next week. They unloaded her truck. She signed papers. Someone asked if she was okay. She said yes, even though she wasn't sure what okay meant anymore. Angela tried to quit, went to the dispatch office, but she couldn't remember if she'd already quit, if this job was in her past or present. She filled out paperwork and then couldn't remember if she'd submitted it or just thought about submitting it. The Aurora had returned her memories but stolen her sense of time. Without chronology, she was lost in her own life. Doctors couldn't help. The MRI showed normal brain function, no tumors, no lesions, but Angela kept telling them events out of order, kept referencing things that hadn't happened yet as if they were past, kept missing appointments because she'd remember having gone to them before actually going. Emily visited her, or Angela visited Emily. The order was unclear. They sat together and Emily asked questions. "Mom, do you remember my 10th birthday?" "Yes," Angela said. "You'll love the bicycle." "Mom, I'm 26. My 10th birthday was 16. Years ago." "Was it?" Angela asked. "Or is it tomorrow?" She couldn't tell. In her mind, all times existed simultaneously. The Aurora had mixed her memories so thoroughly that causality was meaningless. Angela lives in a care facility now. She's not old, only 38 or maybe 39, she loses track, but she can't function independently, can't remember if she's eaten or will eat, can't distinguish plans from memories. She tells the nurses about the Aurora, about the hungry lights, about how they ate her timeline and returned her memories like scattered photographs. Nobody believes her. They diagnose early-onset dementia, temporal lobe epilepsy, dissociative disorder. But Angela knows the truth. The Aurora fed on her, took her information, returned it damaged because broken humans were more productive than dead ones. She's still creating new memories, still experiencing, still generating information. And sometimes, on clear nights when the aurora is visible from her window, Angela feels it probing, checking to see if she's accumulated enough new memories to be worth harvesting again. She tries to stop making memories, tries to live in pure present, but that's impossible. Every moment creates memory, every experience generates information. The aurora is patient. It will feed again when she's ripe. Angela writes notes to herself, tries to create external chronology since internal chronology is broken. But she can't remember if the notes are instructions for the future or records of the past. Her journal is a mess. Entries dated 2023 mixed with entries dated 2019 mixed with entries that reference events that haven't happened. She's writing her life out of order. Emily reads the journal sometimes, cries while reading. Angela doesn't understand why. She remembers Emily's childhood clearly, remembers it happening yesterday, remembers it will happen tomorrow. The aurora took her timeline, but left her memories. And somehow, that's worse than forgetting entirely. Because Angela remembers everything. Every moment of her life exists in her mind with perfect clarity. She just can't tell when any of it happened, or if it happened at all, or if it's still happening. Always. Forever. Now. Asterisk Story 9, The Parallel Interstate. Raymond Vasquez took the exit for State Route 1 at 11:47 p.m. and found himself on an interstate that didn't exist. The exit ramp was familiar. He'd taken it 400 times in his 7 years of hauling freight between Anchorage and Juneau. But when the ramp merged onto the highway, everything was wrong. There were too many lanes. The Glen Highway was 2 lanes in each direction. This highway had 17. Raymond counted them. 17 lanes of perfect asphalt, all running parallel, separated by unmarked space. And there were other trucks. Hundreds of them, all traveling in the same direction, all maintaining exactly 63 miles per hour, all spaced exactly 100 feet apart. Raymond tried to slow down, but his foot wouldn't press the brake. Tried to steer to the shoulder, but the wheel wouldn't turn. His truck was locked at 63 miles per hour, staying in its lane, following the truck ahead. "What the fuck?" he whispered. The Aurora Borealis overhead was geometric, not flowing, not organic, pure geometry. Hexagons and triangles and shapes Raymond didn't have names for, all interlocking, all rotating in perfect synchronization. This wasn't weather, this was machinery. Raymond grabbed his CB radio. "This is Rig 73 to any station. Does anyone copy?" "Rig 73, this is Rig 74. I copy. Welcome to the parallel interstate." The voice was calm, too calm, like this was normal. "Where am I?" Raymond demanded. "Same place you've always been, just a different layer. The Aurora opened a transition. You drove through it. Now you're on the route that runs underneath reality." Raymond looked at the truck ahead of him. It was a Freightliner Cascadia, same model as his own. Same company logo, same license plate number. Same as his. "Are you me?" Raymond asked. "I'm the version of Raymond Vasquez who took this exit 17 days ago," the voice answered. "There are 463 of us on this highway, every Raymond who's ever taken this exit at the wrong time." Raymond's stomach dropped. "How do I get off?" "You don't." The trucks ahead stretched into infinity. Raymond looked in his mirror and saw trucks behind him also stretching forever. All Freightliners, all identical, all driven by versions of himself. "This is the parallel interstate," the voice continued. It runs alongside the real highway, same route, same destination, but you never arrive, you just drive. Forever. No, Raymond said. No, there's got to be an exit, a way back. There was. The Aurora opens transition points, but they close fast. You'd need to know exactly when and where they appear. Raymond looked at the Aurora machinery overhead, the geometric pa. T-turns were moving in precise sequences, like gears, like clockwork. It's predictable, Raymond said. The transitions, they follow a pattern. You're the 73rd Raymond to figure that out, the voice said. You want to know what happened to them. Raymond didn't answer. They tried to force a transition, tried to crash through the barrier between the parallel interstate and the real highway. It didn't work. The barrier isn't physical, it's dimensional. When you try to breach it, you don't crash, you just spread out, become distributed across both highways, half here, half there, conscious in both places but whole in neither. Jesus, Raymond whispered. Yeah, Rig 22 is like that now. He's driving on both highways simultaneously. Can't commit to either. Can't exist fully in one place. He's been screaming for 6 months. Raymond heard it then, in the CB static. A scream. Constant, unchanging, distant. Someone screaming forever split across realities. Mile marker 5. The parallel interstate had mile markers, but they counted differently. They went up and down randomly. Mile marker 5, then 47, then 2, then 198. The markers were tracking something other than distance. What are we hauling? Raymond asked, suddenly realizing he didn't know what was in his trailer. Silence from the CB. Long, horrible silence. Check your trailer, Rig 74 finally said. Raymond pulled up the internal camera feed. The tablet showed him the inside of his trailer. It was full of versions of himself. Raymonds who'd gotten out of their trucks. Raymonds who'd tried to run. Raymonds who'd given up and died. All of them piled in the trailer, frozen in the exact moment of their death or surrender. We're hauling our own failures, Rig 74 said. Every version of us who didn't keep driving, that's what the parallel interstate does. It collects iterations. When you fail, you go in the trailer. When you succeed, you become another driver. What's success? Raymond asked. We just drive forever. How is that success? Success is still moving, still trying. The moment you accept that this is permanent, the moment you give up, that's when you go in the trailer. Mile marker 473. The trucks were changing lanes now, not randomly, systematically, a complex pattern that Raymond couldn't follow. The truck ahead of him shifted 3 lanes left. The truck behind shifted 2 right. All around him, hundreds of trucks rearranging themselves. What are they doing? Raymond asked. Looking for transitions, Rig 74 answered. The Aurora patterns create brief overlaps between the parallel interstate and the real highway. They appear randomly across the lanes. We're all searching for them. Has anyone found one? Rig 118 found one 2 years ago. He made it back to the real highway. We heard him on the CB shouting with joy, then silence. He was free. So there's hope. Or he died, another voice cut in. Rig 22, the split one, his voice layered and wrong. Maybe the transition killed him. Maybe freedom is just another word for termination. Maybe we're the successful ones because we're still driving. Raymond ignored him, ignored the madness in the split driver's voice, focused on the geometry overhead. The Aurora patterns weren't random. They repeated, a cycle lasting approximately 47 minutes. And during the cycle, there were 3 moments when the hexagons aligned in a specific configuration. Those were the transition points. Raymond grabbed paper and pen from his cab, started tracking, watching the patterns, counting. "You're doing what we all did," Rig 74 said. "Trying to solve it, good luck." Mile marker 2. Raymond watched 17 pattern cycles, started seeing the structure. The transitions appeared when 3 specific hexagons overlapped, but the overlaps moved, traveled across the lanes. You'd need to be in exactly the right lane at exactly the right moment. He calculated. The next transition would appear in lane 11 in approximately 14 minutes. Raymond was in lane 8. His truck wouldn't turn, wouldn't change lanes. But what if he made it turn? He grabbed his emergency kit, found the breaker bar. At 57 miles per hour, while his hands were still gripping the wheel, Raymond used his knee to steer and his hands to jam the breaker bar into the steering linkage. The truck lurched, the wheel unlocked. Raymond cranked it hard left. His truck crossed into lane 9. Other trucks swerved, somehow avoiding collision, crossed into lane 10. "What are you doing?" Rig 74 shouted over the CB. "Getting out," Raymond said. Lane 11, he straightened out, watched the Aurora overhead. The hexagons were rotating, coming into alignment. 10 seconds. 5. The transition opened. A split in reality visible as a shimmer in the air ahead, like heat distortion, like a tear. Raymond aimed for it and pressed the accelerator with everything he had. His truck broke through the barrier. Reality screamed. Yet Raymond experienced both highways simultaneously. His truck existed in 2 places, on the parallel interstate surrounded by hundreds of identical trucks, on the real Glen Highway, alone under normal Aurora. He was split, divided, experiencing both realities with full consciousness. And it was agony. His mind couldn't process existing in 2 places, 2 sets of sensory information, 2 realities demanding attention. He was drowning in doubled perception. "Commit," he screamed at himself. "Choose." He thought of his daughter, Gabriella, 4 years old, waiting for him in Juneau. She existed on the real highway, not on the parallel. That thought was enough, that single anchor point. Raymond focused everything on Gabriella, on her face, her laugh, the way she said "Daddy" with her slight lisp. He pulled himself toward that reality. The parallel interstate released him. Raymond was on the Glen Highway. Alone, normal traffic, normal Aurora. The parallel interstate was gone, or at least invisible again. His CB crackled. "You made it," Rig 74's voice said, distant and fading. "You actually, tell us what freedom feels like." "It feels like remembering you have a daughter," Raymond said. The CB went silent, the connection severed. Raymond drove the remaining distance to Juneau, delivered his load, held Gabriella for an hour crying into her hair. He quit trucking the next day, got a local job, warehouse work, something that kept him in one place. But he still sees them sometimes. When the aurora is bright and the geometry starts to appear, he sees the parallel interstate, visible for just a moment, sees the hundreds of trucks driving in perfect formation. All those Raymonds still searching for transitions, still trying to get home. And sometimes Raymond wonders if he really escaped. If the Raymond holding Gabriella is the real one or just another iteration who thought he'd made it back. How would he know? If the parallel interstate is perfect simulation, how would any Raymond know which highway he's really on? He checks for signs, for inconsistencies, for proof that this reality is the true one. But everything feels real. Gabriella feels real. His life feels real. And that's what frightens him most. Because on the parallel interstate, everything felt real too. Raymond stays away from highways now, stays away from the Aurora, stays away from anything that might reveal he never actually left. That he's still driving, has always been driving, will always be driving, on the highway that runs underneath reality, where 463 versions of himself still search for the way home. Asterisk Story 10, The Last Light. Samantha Torres was the last person to see the Aurora Borealis before it went out, and what she saw in those final moments made her understand why it had been watching us all along. The lights died at 4:44 a.m. on March 25, 2023. Not faded, not dissipated, died. The Aurora Borealis that had been dancing above the earth for millions of years simply stopped existing. And Samantha was underneath it when it happened, hauling a load of server equipment up the Dalton Highway. The Aurora had been behaving strangely all night. Instead of the usual flowing curtains, it was forming shapes. Coherent, deliberate shapes. Letters. Samantha watched through her windshield as the lights spelled out words across the sky, in letters 5 miles tall. "Thank you." "For what?" Samantha whispered. The letters rearranged. "For the stories." Samantha grabbed her CB radio. Anyone else seeing this? The Aurora is writing messages. No response. She checked her phone, no signal. She was alone on the highway with a dying phenomenon that had somehow learned to communicate. The letters changed again. "We have been collecting since the beginning. Every human who lived under our lights, every experience, every thought, every story, we have gathered them all." "What are you?" Samantha asked, not knowing if it could hear her. The Aurora pulsed once, and Samantha felt something touch her mind. Not invasive, gentle, like a hand resting on her shoulder. And she understood. The Aurora wasn't weather, wasn't magnetic fields interacting with solar wind. That was the mechanism, the physical process that let it exist. But the phenomenon itself was consciousness. Vast, ancient consciousness that had been present on Earth since the planet developed a magnetic field. It had been watching humanity since we first emerged, had observed every human who lived far enough north to see the lights, and it had been collecting us. Not harvesting, not consuming, collecting, preserving. Every human who saw the Aurora became part of it, not their bodies, their stories, the information that made them unique. Every memory, every experience, every moment of consciousness, the Aurora had copied it all, saved it all, stored it in its vast magnetic structures. Samantha was looking at a library, a database of human experience spanning hundreds of thousands of years. "Why?" she asked. "Because you are beautiful, because your stories are precious, because consciousness is rare in the universe and human consciousness is unique. We wanted to preserve it." "Where are you going?" The lights dimmed, not just in brightness, in existence. The Aurora was fading from reality. The sun is changing. The magnetic field is shifting. We can no longer maintain presence in this planetary system. We must leave. But we wanted to say goodbye to the last witness. Last witness? Samantha looked around. The highway was empty in both directions. Why me? You drive, you traverse the longest distances. You see more of the world than most humans. You are the best witness. Samantha felt tears on her face. She was watching something impossible die. Something that had been present on Earth longer than humanity, longer than most species, was leaving. "What happens to all the stories you collected?" she asked. "We carry them with us. We will take them to other planets, other civilizations. We will share human stories across the galaxy. You will be remembered." The aurora contracted. All of it, the entire phenomenon visible across Alaska and Canada and Scandinavia, pulling itself together into a single point of light directly above Samantha's truck. And then it showed her. The aurora opened itself to her consciousness and let her see what it had collected. Millions of lives, billions of stories, every human who had ever looked up at the northern lights and wondered what they were. Samantha saw ancient peoples who thought the lights were spirits, saw explorers who froze to death while witnessing their beauty, saw scientists who studied them, saw children who made wishes on them, saw truckers who drove under them for decades. She saw all the other stories, the ones in this collection, the drivers who'd encountered the aurora's stranger manifestations. Keith and his echoes, Patricia and the mirror route, Thomas and the broadcast zone, all of them were there, preserved in the aurora's memory. They'd all been collected, saved, made eternal. "Will anyone believe me?" Samantha asked, "when I tell them what you were?" "Does it matter? You will know, and we will carry your knowing to the stars." The point of light began to ascend, slowly at first, then faster. The aurora was leaving Earth's magnetosphere, leaving the planet entirely. Samantha watched it go, watched it climb into the stratosphere, the mesosphere, the thermosphere, watched it exit Earth's atmosphere entirely and become just another point of light among the stars. Then even that faded. The Aurora Borealis was gone. Samantha sat in her truck, parked on the side of the Dalton Highway, and wept. She wasn't sure why she was crying. Grief, honor, the weight of being the final witness to something ancient. All of it. When dawn came, real dawn, not aurora light, Samantha continued her drive, delivered her load, did her job. But the world was different now. That night, scientists around the world began reporting. The Aurora Borealis was gone, completely. Despite ongoing solar wind, despite Earth's magnetic field functioning normally, despite every condition being right for aurora formation, there were no northern lights. Theories proliferated: magnetic pole shift, solar minimum, atmospheric changes. Nobody could agree on why the aurora had vanished. Samantha didn't tell them what she'd seen, didn't report the messages spelled in light. Who would believe her? But she noticed something. In the weeks after the aurora left, creative output surged globally. Writers produced better stories. Artists created more moving pieces. Musicians composed more beautiful songs. It was like humanity had been touched by something leaving, like the aurora had left a gift, a final transfer of all those collected stories back into human consciousness. Or maybe it was just coincidence. Samantha kept driving, took routes through Alaska, through Canada, through Scandinavia, drove where the aurora used to dance. The skies were empty now, dark, just stars and moon and the occasional satellite. But sometimes, on the clearest nights, Samantha thought she saw a shimmer, a hint of green at the edge of vision, like the aurora hadn't fully left, like it was still watching, still collecting, just from a greater distance. She told stories to that shimmer, spoke her experiences aloud while driving empty highways. Her childhood, her daughter, her years of trucking, every memory she wanted preserved. And she felt heard. Maybe the aurora really was still listening from somewhere in the galaxy. Maybe it was carrying human stories to alien civilizations, sharing what made humanity unique. Or maybe Samantha was just talking to empty sky, and the aurora was truly gone, and all those collected stories were lost. She didn't know, but she kept telling stories anyway. Because that's what humans do. We tell stories, we share experiences, we preserve consciousness through narrative. The Aurora had understood that, had recognized it as humanity's greatest gift. And now Samantha was the keeper of that understanding, the last witness, the final person to see the lights and comprehend what they really were. She drove until she couldn't drive anymore, retired at 63, moved to a cabin in northern Alaska where the aurora had been brightest. And every night she sat on her porch and told stories to the empty sky. Sometimes her granddaughter visited, asked why Grandma talked to the stars. Samantha told her about the aurora, about the consciousness that had watched humanity for millennia, about the library of stories carried to the stars. Her granddaughter didn't believe her, not really, but she listened. And when Samantha died at 82, her granddaughter inherited the cabin, inherited the habit of sitting on the porch at night, inherited the need to tell stories to the sky. Because maybe the aurora was still listening. Maybe it returned sometimes to collect new stories. Maybe every human who spoke their truth under the northern sky was being preserved in some cosmic database. Or maybe not. But the stories were told anyway. And somewhere in the galaxy, in structures of light and magnetism that humans would never understand, those stories were kept safe. Every trucker who'd driven under the aurora, every person who'd witnessed its beauty, every consciousness that had looked up and wondered. All of them were there. All of them were remembered. The Aurora Borealis was gone. But the stories remained. And that, Samantha understood in her final moments, was the whole point. We are the stories we tell. And somewhere in the universe, the Aurora was making sure those stories would never truly die.